Hi there, everyone. I am Astral Meadow, and I am honored to be here today to present to you a deep dive into the Akashic Records. So, some of the things that we'll be talking about in this class are defining, well, what are the Akashic Records? What are those? What are their purpose? What are some of the ways that they come up throughout history and some of their different names? We'll dive into the structure of the records. So the types of energies that you might meet there, and some of the different aspects to the records. We will also discuss common misconceptions about the Akashic records and also a variety of ways in which we can work with them. And also some just tips for those who are just starting out on this journey to help you really root into it and develop a really good foundation in which to build your relationship with the records on. So, I am very excited to go into this deep dive with you all today. I will start by just sharing a little bit about how the records found me. So, I kind of have this belief that the records always come into our lives at the perfect time. And even if we're not quite ready to receive them, the fact that they've even been brought into our sphere or into our awareness always happens kind of in this like divine timing. So the records came into my life at a time when I was really ready to try something different. I had been exploring a lot of different metaphysical tools and I had been studying esoterica for a really long time. And I had a pretty solid practice as far as my own rituals and my own personal spiritual practice that I was very rooted into. But I am always a seeker at heart, so I'm always going to these wonderful expos and these fairs and meeting these beautiful people. So I went to Metaphysical Expo, and at the door, they had told us that if we entered our name, at the end of the day, they would be drawing for a winner, and that each practitioner that was there that day would have some kind of door prize involved in this. So I received a text at the end of the day that I had won an Akashic Records reading. And it was quite profound because this woman had actually added me on social media 2 weeks before this. And I had felt just kind of a pull towards her, but I didn't really explore her work or go to like her website or anything. I just recognized her name and I was like, "Oh wow. Like I've already saw I think I'm friends with this girl on social media already." So I started to work with her. I had a couple of readings over the course of a year or two, and each one was so profound. Like the amount of information we were able to pull forward within 90 minutes was so beautiful and would carry me through these long periods of time. And the more I would live my life, the more that those little readings would come back into my awareness and start to make even more sense in real time. So the experience of the reading itself was already beautiful, and I felt like I was able to do a lot of healing. I was able to make a lot of connections, make a lot of sense of things that just felt almost impossible to carry, impossible to heal or recover from. But then it continued to carry with me. It's almost like the resonance of the records was now in my field, and I was tuning into them all the time. So I'm like, oh, this is kind of what the record said. And I would start to notice the wisdom that I was getting from those readings appearing in my outer reality. So I later decided to take a class with this woman, and she taught me how to open my own records, which was really profound because it allowed me to have a little bit more independence and not be so, stuck on paying her and creating time to have these readings. And in real time, when I had a question right then, I could sit down, open my records, and receive the guidance right there. And so learning to open my own records was a huge gift for me. And I spent a couple of years in my own records. I developed a very regular practice, and I feel very, very comfortable in the records. And at some point, they started to guide me that it was time for me to start reading for other people and to start teaching at one point, which was kind of nerve-wracking in the beginning, but the way that they approach the future is so gentle, and it's always up for us to respond to certain calls when we're ready. But it's like it was almost like it was always fated or something for me to not only find the records, but to be able to work with them and also share them with the collective. So today, we're going to focus on kind of exploring and going into a deep dive into what they are. So, to define the records, we would start with defining the word Akasha. So, Akasha is a Sanskrit term that translates to primal substance, that which all things are formed from. So, Akasha is like the blueprint that interconnects all things into a unified whole. So when we look at that definition and then start to try to look at, well, what are the Akashic records? The Akashic records are the archive that stores the wisdom, the truths, the journeys of every soul who has ever existed throughout all of time. There is a more collective aspect to the records where you can tune into just the overall history of the collective experience. And then within that collective, we exist as individuals and have our own personalized records. So when you first start to learn, you are mostly working within your own field, within your own records, connecting to your own personal guides and masters and teachers and loved ones, which we will go into soon. So the records are a non-religious, non-dogmatic field of consciousness. They are brought up within a lot of different belief systems like religions and different cultures. However, no one owns the records, and they are more of a collective energy that all human beings have a right to work with and tune into their own records. So they have many names, and throughout history, we have called them different things. So one of the ways that they have been described that many people have heard about would be the Book of Life. So if you look at the Book of Life as an archive or a library of everything that has ever been, that is happening right now in real time, and then everything that is to come, that is constantly being updated with living wisdom, then that corresponds to what we would call the Akashic records. So that is one of the names it's been given. Ancient Greek philosophers Aristotle and Plato identified the records as the field. So if you hear them bring up the field in their work, they're actually talking about the Akashic records. Helena Blavatsky identified the records. And if you read some of her work, you will notice that she is tuning into this field of information that is boundless and beyond time. And Rudolf Steiner is actually the one that coined the term Akashic. So Akasha obviously predates that period, but he actually started calling it the Akashic Chronicle. And if you read Steiner's work, you will notice that he has a lot of information that seems unknowable. Like, how could he possibly know this? Like, where is he getting this from? And before I ever really knew about the records, I had already started kind of reading some of Steiner's work and some of Blavatsky's work. And I was also drawn to Plato. So this is very interesting to me. But I would hear some of the things that Steiner would say, and there was like this coherence within my body and soul where I would say, okay, I don't know how he knows this, but that is actually true. And later on, I discovered that he was tuning into the Akashic records. So it made a lot more sense. And also was really cool that I was tuning into the records before I actually knew what to call them. So he calls them the Akashic Chronicle. And he has archived a lot of the information that he was able to pull from the Akashic records, which is quite a beautiful body of wisdom. In the 1940s, Edgar Cayce, also known as the Sleeping Prophet, was also tapping into the Akashic field. He was entering the records from a trance-like state. So some people would call this trance channeling. He would lay down and put himself into a very relaxed, peaceful, sleepy state. And then he would have his secretary ask questions, sometimes for him or for other people. And she would record what he was saying. But because he was in a more unconscious state, he wouldn't always remember. And he didn't exactly know, I think, at the time what was happening. So looking back, we can see that he is obviously accessing the Akashic records, but through trance channeling. So when I was taught to go into my records, I was actually instructed to do so with my eyes open. And this is kind of the foundation of my practice is to tune into the records very consciously in a very awakened state. However, I have given myself permission over time to explore the records in more of a meditative state at times as well. So I would meditate with them, have a journal next to me, and then write everything down after my meditation is over. So there are a lot of little tips and rules and ideas that people may suggest for you that in the beginning it may be good, but at some point you may go a little rogue and say, well, that actually doesn't work for me anymore. And I have the sovereignty to make this choice all on my own. So even though I was instructed to do the records with my eyes open, sometimes I absolutely do them in meditation. And I have even done them in the evening where I'm about to fall asleep and I'm anxious and I just need a little support. I go into my records before bed, which some people would say don't do that. Well, maybe not in the beginning, but it's absolutely helped me a lot on some rough nights. So, anything that I suggest for you is my own personal suggestion, and your records may actually guide you to have a different structure than me. So don't take everything I say as like this concrete fact that you have to withhold for, the entirety of your relationship with the records. Um, it is good to have a little structure in the beginning, but at the end of the day, we can always ask our records, what works best for us. So there is a quantum physicist, Dr. Ervin Laszlo, that has done a lot of work within the field as far as relating it back to science. And he has this wonderful book called Science and the Akashic. So you can look into that if you're really wanting to study it from a more tangible perspective, because the science actually is there, which corresponds with some of the wisdom. And then another person I really love is Barbara Hanclough, and in her book Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, she discusses the records from different perspectives. And I almost wasn't going to bring this up, but my records instructed me that this was important. So in Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, she sees the records as everywhere, right? The records exist. There's nowhere that the records are not. They quite literally make up the blueprint of everything. However, in her work, she sees the records not only in every dimension, but there is a correspondence between the iron core crystal center of the earth and the Akashic records. It's sort of like a database which the records are stored in, but once again, they're also all encompassing. But in her work, it is actually our right as humans to be able to tune into the records because the iron in our blood actually resonates with that iron core, that iron crystal core. So when I heard this, it was quite empowering for me to not only have permission to go into the records, but to know that this is actually something that's very natural for us as humans to be able to have this experience. And in the past, throughout some of these different cultures, they all knew about the records, but some of them kind of reserved this sacred space for the mystics and the shamans and, certain initiation rites. So even though most of the cultures knew about the records, not everyone was able to experience them in their own personal life directly, and maybe they were slipping in and out of the records through meditations and things like that. But at this point in history, we have this ability to develop our own personal relationship with the records that really hasn't existed in the past as far as the whole collective having this access. So it's quite a wonderful time to be alive, to be able to do this work for ourselves, and to have this, permission to be able to read for ourselves, and to know that it is our divine birthright to do that. So, um, let's see, looking over my notes. Let's go into the overall structure of the record. So, if you read about the records, a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, the masters, teachers, and loved ones said, or they will say that they told me, and you'll start to wonder, well, who are they? So, when you're in this field, there are different types of energetic beings who relay information to us. So we are working in direct unison with our higher self, but there's also different guides that are in resonance with the answer that we are seeking. And so different ones will come forward depending on the lesson or whatever we're going through at that time. So the lords of the records are beings within the field that we don't actually interact with directly. They have never been human, they have never incarnated, and their sole purpose is to protect the integrity of the records. So we will never see them. They don't show us their faces. Their exclusive focus is just maintaining the sanctity of the records and making sure they do not become corrupted or compromised. However, they do assist the masters in downloading the energy and information that we need in a moment. So I like to look at it like if these are the records, the lords are facing the records, okay? But the masters are facing us, okay? So the masters are working in unison with the Lord or lords of the records, and they're downloading the information, and then the masters choose which lessons or teachers that would be perfect for us in that moment to help us move through either a period or that will correspond to whatever thing that we need to know in that moment. So the masters have been in relationship with us since our inception. So in every lifetime, we have had the same masters working with us. So they know us very intimately. They have unconditional love for us and they can see us in our wholeness at all times. So I like to think about them as, friends that exist throughout all space and time that are really there for guidance and to kind of hold our hand and remind us of our own inherent beauty. So the masters are helping distribute the information and helping choose the guides for certain moments. We then have the teachers. So teachers may or may not have been embodied at a particular time, and they are more lesson specific. So they have more of like an overall reaching theme. So sometimes the teacher may be an overall energy that you're working through at that time. Like, let's say temperance. That was one that I had pop up quite a bit. And then once we've mastered that particular lesson, they move on and go and work with some other soul. And some of these might be able to work with, a large group of people at the same time as well. So they are more lesson specific and they don't necessarily linger around for the entirety of our lives unless we are simply working on one lesson throughout, which some souls might. The loved ones are people that we have known in our life that are now deceased. So they may have been related to us. They may be ancestors. So we may have a personal attachment to them or we may not. For example, it could have been, your kindergarten teacher that has a crossover that might just be the best guide to deliver that information that you need in that moment. We do not always know who we're working with, and it doesn't always matter. However, when you're in the records, if the guide is someone like a loved one, you will be able to feel that familiarity within their essence. So a lot of times we might not know who the guide is unless you ask. So I feel like in a lot of books they make it seem like it's unimportant, but I always like to ask. Sometimes I might not. Sometimes it might just feel really obvious, like who is the guide that's working with me through this? And I always love this question because sometimes it's not always what I might think. So to me, it helps me feel more grounded and have even more insight into the theme instead of it being kind of a vague, overreaching lesson. So those are the types of beings that you might work with within the structure of the records. There are fixed and evolving aspects of the records. So the fixed aspects are going to be who you are at the core of your being. So kind of like your soul's blueprint. And these truths do not change. They are timeless and they are foundational to who you are. They include your soul purpose and your essential soul qualities. So I'll just share something more personal here about a fixed aspect of my records. So I was at my inception, okay? One of my core purposes that carries through every single lifetime for me is wonder. So they told me that wonder is the closest word that we have to describe my overall essence. And when I ask certain questions for other people, this actually comes through a lot differently depending on the individual. So it's not that there's not other souls out there who also have that sense of wonder in every lifetime. It's just that for me, that is a core aspect of my soul identity that will always be with me. So the more mutable aspects of the records, which are ever evolving. And the records are always being updated. They're always growing and expanding. So within our records, you can ask questions about the present, and a lot of times you'll go back into a past incarnation, or see something that has occurred in the past that may be the overreaching cause of the thing that you're working through in that moment. Okay. So those are fixed points that have created the energy that you're dealing with right then. So when we look at the future from the perspective of the records, which we absolutely can do, there may be fixed points in the future, but because it's in the future, we always have our own free will to decide our own reality, to respond in whatever way that we want. So maybe it's a fixed point that we cross paths with a certain soul, but that doesn't mean that we have to actually nurture that. It doesn't mean that we actually have to make a big deal about a certain connection. We can just, actually walk on by. So that is more of the evolving aspect. It gives us the choice to decide our own direction as far as the future goes. So that's going to be a more mutable aspect of the records. And each choice that we make changes the structure of our future reality. And so that is one of the ways that it is always expanding and continuously being updated. So now let's go into some common misconceptions about the records. So it is not fortune telling, even though we can look and see glimpses of the future, which help us in this present moment to make choices from a more aware place. It has always been suggested to me not to use the records as a way to predict the future, that there's actually other modalities that work better for that. So that's going to be where tarot and pendulum work come in handy for those yes or no, like should I, what does that, look like? But with the records, we're we're not predicting a certain future. We're receiving guidance to hold space for us as we make our future a reality. Okay, so it's a little bit different. It's not mediumship. So although we work with people's loved ones and sometimes their ancestors and things like that, it is not the same as mediumship. So if that's what someone is seeking, it's actually going to be a better suggestion to send them to a really good medium or a psychic. I'm gonna have a sip. So some people think that you need to be in a trance like or altered state in order to access the records, and that's not true. It is a simple shift of our awareness into the Akashic field that takes us into the records. And many people do that through the sacred prayer process. And there are different interpretations of this prayer. So I'm not going to tell you which one to go with. I'm just going to instruct you to look around, maybe get some different books and work with the prayer. And the one that you feel like helps you root into the records the best is actually going to be the one that I would suggest that you work with. So they're only about past lives. That's as much as past lives do come up very often because so much of what we're dealing with is actually like stems from a past life as far as karma and things like that are concerned. Every bit of information that comes through the records is always grounded and rooted in the present moment. So I actually find working with them from where I'm at right here in this place and time, I get the most grounded answers. So as much as past lives are definitely a part of it, it's not quite the same as going and having like past life regression, which is also a beautiful modality. So if that's what you're seeking, just to go and discover some past life, then that actually might be a better modality. If you're seeking guidance for something you're dealing with in this present reality, then the records might be a better resource. So, another misconception is the records are only for psychics or spiritually gifted people. And this is simply not true. The records are a collective thing. So, we all have permission, um, and we all have the ability to access our records. Some people are going to be able to root into that a little bit more. Some people may stumble upon the records and it's just really not the modality that they resonate with the most. So they might dip in and dip right back out, and that is perfectly fine. But everyone has the ability to do it. You don't have to have some kind of special powers or some kind of initiation to be able to have access into your records. And the last thing I'll talk about is accessing the records is dangerous or invites negative energy. So when we're in the records, we are in a sanctuary of light. And when we access our records with an open heart and pure intent, we are naturally going to be protected. And there are built in aspects of the records that not only safeguard the records, but that safeguard you. So I have had people over time just make little suggestions about the records, which I was like, oh, okay. So I'm, fragmenting my soul as I'm like studying all these different lifetimes, and that's simply not true. As soon as I close my records, I am right here in real time and very present in my physical body. So I think some people just have their own misconceptions of it, and then they continue to spread that around, and it creates a little bit of fear and confusion around what the records actually are. And so they are not dangerous. You are not inviting entities into your body or anything like that. So it's a lot different than even channeling. You are receiving the information. So the way that I view it is that the guide or the teacher or whoever, it's almost like going into the library and checking out a book, and they're saying this is the book that you're looking for. This is what holds all the information that corresponds with the question that you're asking, and so they're quite literally giving me that information. So it's more like a download instead of just inviting this entity to speak directly through me. That is not how I work in the records at all. So there is no fear of like possession or anything like that. So we've already talked about that some of the ways that we can work with the records would be for our own personal healing. They offer insight and clarity into our path. They also are like the best cheerleaders. So if I am feeling discouraged or I have forgotten my own beauty, I love going into the records and having them remind me of things. So not only are they sharing insights, but they're also very encouraging. And when we're in that space, we are in a field of unconditional love. And the records see us as perfect and whole at the core of our being. So even though in that moment we may feel dissociated or fragmented, or we may not feel like ourselves, when we enter this field and we see ourselves from this bird's eye view, which is the records, we're able to have a clear perception on who we are throughout the entirety of our soul's journey. And so this offers a lot of encouragement in those moments where, we may feel discouraged or depressed, or, we may have something kind of blocking the way that we see ourselves. We may not trust ourselves in those moments. So they are wonderful for encouraging us and just holding space for us. So sometimes I go into the records and I'm not looking for advice. I go into the field and I just sit there and I just receive their unconditional love. I feel their encouragement through my body. In this way, it feels kind of like having an energy healing session, and I just sit in the field and I feel nourished. I feel held and nurtured. Okay. So we're not always needing um the words. It's actually sometimes the overall feelings and sensations, and that just deeper understanding that I'm okay, I'm safe, and I am loved. All right. So for some people, that might be their favorite way to work with the records. So maybe they don't necessarily want all of the information. They just want to know that they are held in that moment. So when you're first working with someone in the records, like you're getting a reading, setting some intentions around what you're seeking will help you utilize your time with that person better. So creating a list of things that you really want to explore is awesome. And having more open-ended questions creates a conversation with the records. So, like I said, yes or no questions are not necessarily the best ones to ask the records. So, the questions that are like how, when, what, or where are going to open up an entire conversation. And what starts off as one question ends up getting you so much information sometimes because now you're in open communication with your records. And so sometimes just having a single theme might be enough, but I always tell people to have, 10 or 15 questions just kind of on hand that you would like to explore in a session with someone. When I'm in my own records, I usually have like one or two things that I'm just really interested in, and then we see where it goes. So, creating a sacred space is good. However, there is no specific ritual that needs to be done in order to access the records, aside from maybe saying the sacred prayer. Being in a space where you can really feel grounded and comfortable, however, in the beginning is really important. When I first started, I would journal with my records in my book nook, and that was the place that I felt the most relaxed. And when we're relaxed, we're able to really receive their insights in a really fluid yet grounded way. And so in the beginning, creating that sacred space was important. I like to encourage my students, even in class, to bring some kind of either tool or object that they work with that helps them feel really centered. Because sometimes when we're, you know, too much in the higher energies, it can make us feel just a little bit dissociated. So having either a crystal, I like to work with tourmaline. I also have a couple little pieces of things that I kind of keep around that I might put in my sphere that just helps me feel more rooted. So, especially if I was going to be leaving my home, having these objects just brings me into that comfort space. So, it kind of helps me take that sacred space with me. So, but really, nothing is necessary. So, you can actually ask the records in real time, what would be the easiest way for me to feel grounded while I'm in my records? And what works for you, the advice for you might be completely different, right, than what they have told me. So it is a really personal experience. And experience is kind of a key word that I could go into because it is an experiential body of wisdom. So we are kind of like, you know, merging in with this field, and the way that we receive information may be different. One time we might go in and it's us journaling and we were just getting, a couple like some symbolic language, and then another time we may go in and have different sensory experiences. So sometimes I actually might hear the guidance. Sometimes I receive insight through smell. I will never forget smelling blue lotus incense from an Egyptian lifetime. And I'm like, oh wow. And it's like you have that insight into what is the smell, and then you also receive, oh, that's blue lotus. So it's I always tell people to be open to the variety of ways the information might come through. And the longer you spend in the records, the more comfortable you are with these different types of information, you may be able to receive it in a new way. So be open with the way that you work with the records. So different ways that I work with the records are I dance with them. So I'll open my records and I'll either let them guide me to what kind of music I should play or I already have something going. And I just go into this flow state with my records open and it's always really beautiful. Sometimes I'll record it just to kind of see like what does this look like for from the outsider's perspective. They have helped me create yoga sequences. I am a mixed media artist, so sometimes I create art with my records open. I am also a poet and a writer, and that is something I didn't have any kind of knowledge of or access to until till I started working with the records. Actually, in my first class, when we were journaling together as a group, I said out loud to the class, well, don't expect much from me because I'm not a writer. And the more I started working in my records, the more I realized, oh, that is actually not true. Um, and I started journaling with them more, and I actually really started aligning more with like this inner poet inside of me and started writing stream of consciousness poetry. So I actually like now have this book of poems that I will be publishing one day because I was able to work through that limiting belief of saying over and over again, I'm not a writer. Well, actually, I am. And I love writing with my records open. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just me writing. But if I'm wanting to kind of play with the energies that are available in that moment, I do like to write with my records open. Um, Let me think about some other ways. If you were a musician, you could open your records to write music. And, we, once we're really grounded in our practice, you can open the records of other people with their permission. You can open the records of, let's say, a pet. I have opened my house's records before. And this was quite profound because I just had this feeling that something wasn't right with the structure of the wall in my kitchen. And it took me a minute. Everyone was like, don't worry about it. Like, why are you even stressed about it? And I'm like, I just have this feeling, right? So that's where intuition came in. But I couldn't quite explain why I had this intuitive response of something is going on in my kitchen. And I opened my house's records and I was able to see that the structure of my kitchen had been compromised and that there was water had gotten in through this little hole outside and all of the wood was like starting to mold and there had also been termites that were eating some of the wood and so they showed me that the wall that had been compromised and also this other section of my kitchen that needed some work done. And so I actually had to pay a contractor. And when they tore the wall down, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so validating. So you can also, open your home's records or the home that you're looking to buy. You can open the records for that. So the way that we work with the records will expand as we develop and deepen that relationship. And so don't limit yourself. Don't box yourself into saying, well, I only ask the records questions like this. Um, Allow it to evolve as you evolve. And I love to ask my records questions about, how am I limiting myself in this moment? Um, and it's always like profound. It's things that I just don't know. And so it's always, that's how I know it's a little bit different than intuition, even though it sometimes feels the same as intuition. And everybody asks themselves at some point, like, am I making this up? Because you're like writing things out and you're like, well, where is this coming from? Is this some subconscious you know, energy that's pouring through, and it's not. It is the Akashic records. Um, So the more you work with it, the more you'll be able to trust it just based on your own experience with it, your own sort of provings that occur from the information that you are bringing forward. So, no one's telling you to trust it right away. I would just instruct you to be open-minded, to have an open heart, and just see how it goes for you. Um, Recording your insights is good. So in the beginning, I always suggest that people journal with the records. So what this looks like is I would say the sacred prayer. I would say the sacred prayer, and I would date in my journal what is today, and I always greet them. So if I'm writing, I would say hello, and I usually get some kind of response that lets me know. Like they usually say hello back or show me some kind of enthusiasm. And then I'll put a Q next to my question. So I'll write my question out and then I'll put an A and then the answer will come to me. And this is seems really simple, but it's really helpful looking back. I've been doing this for years now, and being able to go back to the day that I asked it and to also see how did I ask that question, because just lightly changing the structure of how we ask the question can actually help us receive insight from a different perspective. So I might say, okay, well, I asked it this way. Now I'm going to ask it from this angle, now that I've kind of learned a little bit more and receive even deeper insight into it. So if you get kind of a vague answer, I always tell people, well, ask them to elaborate, ask them to, show you it from a different angle, or ask them what you should ask to get a better answer if they are being kind of vague, because they do not necessarily give this unsolicited advice. It's always in resonance with our questions. So our questions are actually really important for the overall success that we're having with them. So a little bit of information on like some tips that you can do in the beginning. Check in the time here. Would be practice regularly. So in the beginning, I usually have my students shoot for, daily for that first week at least, but maybe it's every other day in the beginning, just to get yourself familiar with the energy. And this could be just opening, sitting in it for 5 minutes. I've had some students just open their records and do their makeup in the morning because like they don't have time to sit down and journal, but they're trying to, do it regularly. So you don't always have to make it this big ordeal. You can just go into the field, ask them questions, and then go about your day. And I always like to tell people that there are no silly questions. They love you boundlessly and unconditionally. So, questions that might annoy your friends will not annoy the records. They always, always respond with love and grace. And you can ask them over and over again. So sometimes if I'm going through something, I'm a little bit more insecure and I just need some reassurance. And the records are great because they don't mind reminding me repeatedly until I finally integrate or trust whatever is coming through. So don't ever feel like you have to have some grand, profound question about like the overarching theme of your whole life. And if it's not something so profound that it's not worthy of the records, I ask them all sorts of questions that some people feel like, why does she care about that? And at this point, I look at the records as my friends, like they're my allies, like they are my biggest cheerleaders. They love me. So, of course, I'm going to ask them questions or start conversations with them, especially in areas that I don't necessarily feel comfortable, maybe talking to someone in my waking reality. So, also in the beginning, staying grounded is really important. So, eating before you go in, making sure you're drinking water, moving around. A lot of times the records will just tell you to kind of move around. Because when we're more relaxed and open, the information is able to kind of move through us a little bit more gracefully. Um, so anything that you want to do to kind of center yourself after a session is good. So some advice for when you're working with a sacred prayer, it is advised to go into the records in a sober state, so no drugs or alcohol for 24 hours unless they're, prescriptions, because we want to be clear and open, and we don't want a certain substance to interfere with our overall resonance in the way that we receive the information. So, sobriety is important when working with the records. And also, something that I do and I also instruct others to do is to sit in an open body position when you're saying the prayer. And once you say the records are now open, you can get comfortable and cross your legs and sit however you like. But being in that open body position does impact the reading for me personally. Maybe once you start to work with the records, it's not really a big deal for you. But in the beginning, that's just a tip that I like to give people. Just patience, show yourself love and grace. I've had some people take classes from others and they'll be like, well, I took an Akashic Records class, but I didn't get anything. And they never went back into the records. They didn't build a relationship and they kind of, maybe it's just not meant to be for them. But it feels like they wanted to have this very mystical, um, immersive experience, and they didn't have that right out the bat. And so now they're saying, well, I'm just not good at this. So being patient with yourself, knowing that it's a relationship and that it does deepen over time. So, all those are good, helpful tips. Oh, I think we've covered all of my bullet points for things that I wanted to bring up. So in my closing, I will just share a little bit about how you can connect with me and support my work. I do have a podcast called The Astral Hour. It can be found on any major streaming platforms. I have a website, astrometa.com, which you can go to find any future classes that I will be teaching. I do have one coming up that will be through Zoom. It's 2 different days where we will be working and exploring and learning how to go into our own records. So there is that. I do Akashic readings as well, which all of those can be booked and found on my website. So feel free to reach out with me on there. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and all of those good things. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to join me in this discussion. And I hope that it was well received and that you will continue to explore and dive into the records if you feel called and feel more confident in understanding what they actually are. See you later.